How we doing? We're going to be chatting about decentralized infrastructure, both physical and digital today. But before we dive into that, let's introduce our panelists here. I'm Nick Carpinito from Blockworks Research.
Hey, I'm Nirmal. I'm from Chakra Labs.
Hello, my name is Rustem from Nitrolabs.
I'm Vic. I am at Glow.
And Phil McMannis from Beacon Protocol.
I think before we kick things off here, let's maybe describe DePIN to the audience here. Even within the DePIN sector and maybe decent DePIN adjacent projects today, there's a varying range of definitions that are floating around, and so would love to learn more about how each of you describe the DePIN term and what is and is not a DePIN.
Yeah, I'm happy to go first. I think this term is very overloaded now, and it's really hard to know what is DePIN and what's not. I think like canonically, my mental model now is just like DePIN are things where DePIN is a study of industry outside of DeFi. So it's like we're incentivizing consumers rather than to do financially related outcomes to do things in the physical world or in the virtual world. In the case of our business, we're incentivizing consumers to provide differentiated data sets. But in the case of a lot of other businesses in this industry, it's installing mining rigs, installing solar panels. It's doing physical labor that ultimately ends up with this incentivized behavior, this incentivized supply stream.
Then I assume I can go first. Next. I agree with Nirmal regarding that DePIN is basically used for traditional business in order to, instead of investing own money into capital expenditures, they can just incentivize people to build that infrastructure for them, and then they can utilize it in order to provide services to other projects or to other companies. And we can see in case of Chakra Labs and also in case of Grass how they bootstrap the network and providing the services to AI labs, for example. So distributed network of contributors.
Yeah, I agree that the term is overloaded. I also don't necessarily think the term itself is that important. I think it's just the idea that you can have some kind of programmable economic structure, generally centered around a token being distributed, rewarded, penalties, etc. You can engineer these things to orchestrate coordinated efforts in the real world with physical infrastructure. And that broadly, to me, means that now you can kind of almost customizably create networks that maybe have the same building blocks, but are directed towards different outputs. What I mean by that is like a CPU. A CPU is like a base building block. So is a GPU. It is a piece or an NVMe drive or something. These are just building blocks, but you can engineer economies to orchestrate the ways that these things will interact with potential consumers. And I think DePIN is just like a composability element from economic structures. I don't want to ramble too much about that, but that's kind of how I think, that's my mental model for this when I think of the term, which I agree is very overloaded.
Yeah, I'll also hop on the it's overloaded train. I think it's really grown, especially over the last year. And I think some of that has come from lack of, I'll sort of give my take on DePIN, but I also think some of the sort of growth of the category and the definition has come from a lack of terms to define some other things that are tangential and needing to sort of see that happen in the space to become more inclusive and larger. I think of it as anything where we're decentralizing any type of a network that would normally be in a centralized environment that involves some sort of compute or hardware. And when I say involves computer hardware, it doesn't necessarily need to be physical hardware. It doesn't need to be GPUs, doesn't need to be CPUs, doesn't need to be storage. There's a lot of things that tend to happen in centralized environments like data systems that are ultimately centralized and distributed across different, closed Web 2 environments. I sort of see that expanding that category. And I think it's, ultimately, I think that this sort of larger growth and definition of DePIN is ultimately really good for the sector as a whole to drive more, make it more inclusive and help it grow.
Based on that sort of wide range of definitions that you guys all threw out, what do you think is the biggest misconception about DePINs today?
I think one of the biggest misconceptions about DePINs today is, and I think is that it's not just physical hardware. We're seeing more things move beyond what is specifically, like, everyone thinks about it as like replacing AWS, right? I think some of the classic examples of networks like Render and Filecoin fall under that. I think we're seeing it start to change, and I think that's sort of one of the misconceptions, is that it doesn't need to be just simply that physical compute. I mean, there's things like, Glow, Demo, WeatherXM. These are things that have nothing to do with just compute.
Yeah. And completely agree with that. And the second thing I'll add is that this might be somewhat of a hot take, so feel free to call me out. But I think that we have a tendency to intrinsically value decentralization, and then assume that by virtue of something being decentralized, it is a better than the centralized alternative. So I think in DePIN, my like kind of gripe is that we tend to generalize the virtues of decentralization, irrespective of the specific specificity of where something is applied. And I think we should critically examine whether or not decentralizing a network in terms of like ownership, control, access, so on, actually produces a better user experience than the centralized alternative that kind of exists, instead of just kind of hiding behind, oh, we're decentralized, therefore we're better. And that's kind of my take on this. Is I don't think decentralization is intrinsically the thing to optimize for. I think it's a product that people want to use.
I think people mixing the terms between distributed and decentralized, because most of the DePIN projects have distributed nodes, but it doesn't mean that they're decentralized. Overall, they're usually coordinated through centralized servers. That's kind of my understanding of how people misinterpreting sometimes DePIN.
Yeah, I'll piggyback on what Vic said, which is I think like one of the things to study over the last couple of market cycles is like DePIN has been hot and then it's been not hot. And it's gone through several of these hype cycles. So in 2017, there was the ICO craze. DePIN really hadn't been coined yet, but like these ideas of like, oh, we're going to build Uber on the blockchain were exciting and prevalent, and we dreamed at that time, and then it went away for a while. And then in 2021, 22, you started to see these networks actually get spun up, where there's real supply on the network, there's real GPUs on the network, there's like a real product that can be used. But then again, this hype cycle sort of disappeared. And I think the consequence, the reason why these businesses go through these hype cycles is because historically there's been no real demand. There's been no real customers, no people paying money. And I think like we are in a bit of a trough right now in DePIN where this is not the most exciting or hyped sector. But I think what has gone relatively unnoticed by the market is that these products are starting to get real product market fit. I was just chatting with Vic ahead of this conversation. If you go on DePIN Ninja, DePIN Pulse, you'll see that Glow does 8 figures of ARR. There are a lot of these businesses now that are real, that have real demand side, that have the supply side to support that demand, and they're starting to become generational outcomes. And I think that's really exciting, and the market quite hasn't perceived that yet.
Totally agree. We're at Solana Boston today, as most of you are probably aware, and Solana has recently become a popular choice for DePIN projects to either launch on or migrate from another blockchain to Solana. What makes a certain blockchain architecture well suited for these types of real-world applications?
I have an answer in jest, which is you don't get fired for picking IBM. That's largely where we are with Solana and DePIN today. I think like the liquidity, the network effects, the users, they're all there. TPS is like a vanity metric at this point. It's like Solana's the chain where the users are, and that's where we'll be.
I think in that case, it's also important to note that most DePIN networks using blockchain only for 2 cases, either to reward distribution to Slash contributors, and it's easier, economically efficient to do in a chain that allows you to do it in the most cheapest way. I think that is why. Well, that was one reason why Solana is getting so popular, and also the users easier to distribute it and promote.
I might be throwing a wrench in this whole thing, by saying that Glow is built on Ethereum mainnet. I do understand we're at Solana Boston, but I think the choice as to whether you do one or another is, in my opinion, like if you need the certain technical capabilities that one chain might offer versus another, then the technical decision making choice is the one that you will kind of optimize for, because you have a constraint space, you have an objective, and you have an optimization space that you want to that you make your decisions over. And so I think, for example, for Glow, number one, when Glow launched, Solana had not yet become a DePIN hub, right? So when you launch a protocol, you're also constrained by like what the market looks like at that moment. It's great that Solana has built this DePIN kind of brand, but I also think that I care very little about what chain anything is built on. I care about what they do and who's using it and why they're using it. And I don't think that users are like, oh, they're built on Solana, so I'll use them. Or they're built on Ethereum, so I'll use them. Or this, that, the other. Particularly for something like DePIN, where it's something that is tied to if it's compute or storage, I just care that my file is stored. I just care that my data has some compute done over it, and it's reliable, and it's cheap, and it works well. And as a result, I would be very shocked if we polled all the DePIN users that existed, like actual users, and we're like, did you do this because it's on Solana, or did you do this because it's on ETH? Probably not, but I'm happy to. Actually, I don't know if I want to have that debate right now, but we can at some point. But yeah, that's kind of how I think about it.
Yeah, I think is Beacon's multi-chain. We have EVM and SVM support. I think one of the things that really has been driving a little bit of this is ecosystem focus. I do think TPS is a piece of it, because a lot of these networks, when you look at streaming transactions, volume and speed, and so on some of these larger scales, think about things like, weather data with WeatherXM or 375 AI having tons of different data points being produced different places. I think that's important, but I think that the bigger piece is just the ecosystem getting behind it. I think that as we're starting to see, all of the L1s and L2s out there continuing to improve from a technical standpoint, I think that the ecosystem and community saying this is a place we want to see this happen starts to build that community and helps bring those people together, which I think is a key component of it as well, separate from the technical side.
Building upon that, and maybe taking blockchain selection out of the equation here, how do you balance the inherent sort of latency and processing time that blockchains may extend in comparison to traditional infrastructure with needs of serving the same customer, the same workload?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that's why you're tending to see a lot more of the compute itself happening off-chain, and then on-chain proofs of that is one piece of it. I also think that those pieces that you brought up is also one of the reasons why there's a lot more DePIN growth happening on some of the newer, faster chains, because there is faster finality. You can sort of become more competitive from that standpoint. I think the other piece of it is that I personally think that in DePIN, it's a little bit less relevant, because while there certainly is importance of when we think about things around data and compute coordination, speed is extremely important in that component. But we're also not talking about like high frequency trading. A faster trade is going to get you that edge. There is a little bit more flexibility in DePIN that it doesn't need to be, nanosecond fast.
Yeah, I think this goes back to what I originally said, which is whether or not is decentralization intrinsically inherently better than the centralized alternative. And this is a perfect example of that, which is, like if you need something that is so performant that it is better to do it in a manner that is not decentralized in the way that these decentralized networks are. If you require a certain amount of certain speed, like finality or something that really can't be done, with the existing tech that exists in at least the way that we manage consensus and state in blockchains, then don't try to build it. I think, or maybe that's an example of a centralized a centralized product just having a comparative advantage that maybe you can maybe you probably need to bite the bullet on that one and say, oh, but like all the other things that we can do because we're distributed, or not distributed, decentralized, is better. For Glow, at least, I don't know if the question is you as in your protocol, but at least for Glow, like the rounds happen over a course of a week, right? So like it's it's not a block. It's not Glow is not a chain. It's not like the block time isn't a week, but the epoch time is a week. So when rewards are distributed, so on and so forth. So we don't really care about transactions per second in that way, right? So
Adding to Vic's points regarding it, for the context, Nitrolabs and Terna as a product, we are not the DePIN, we are a solution for DePIN teams, DePIN projects to write data on chain. So basically we realize, it's my observation personally, that most DePIN teams do not write data on chain on a regular basis. They're aggregating it, making a proof, and sending at least either per day, per week, per month, depending on their cadence. So for them, it doesn't matter regarding how fast it would be. It's just the matter of how cheap it is to store and how cheap it is to distribute the reward.
Yeah, I would say the last note here is like we're in 2025 now. We no longer have to play like regulatory theater. As a consequence of that, like we can make decisions based on the best interest of our business rather than having to like LARP as a fully on-chain protocol. And that gives us, quite frankly, a lot more power in terms of servicing our customers and servicing our supply side. To that extent, like I think, yeah, the vast majority of DePIN teams now, you know, most of the coordination happens off chain, and then you write metrics on chain to, you know, have your financials publicly auditable. But I think like that's like largely where we've netted out as a community.
Maybe through a less technical lens here with this next question, what do you believe is, and you being the audience, not your project specifically, but what do you believe is the optimal relationship between a traditional business model and crypto incentives being merged into a DePIN today?
Yeah, I think like for our business, the value with crypto incentives as it is related to like data incentivization is that the cost of acquiring the data is much cheaper. In the sense that like we are global, we're distributed, our cost of capital is cheaper. We're able to acquire the thing that we need to sell at a cheaper rate than like Web2 businesses like a Scale or a Surge or a Mercor can. To that extent, like what we think is really important is that our margin structure as a consequence of that, our gross margins are better than the centralized alternatives. And I think like that is always where we try to live in, is like we're a real business. Look, we have real operating margins, and like if crypto as it stands today can reduce the amount of expenses we pay out on our cost of goods sold, then that results in a very meaningful difference in terms of our operating efficiency and like the way we can delight our customers.
Sorry, I didn't get the question, to be honest.
Just the relationship between a traditional business model and DePIN/crypto incentives, merging that into a DePIN model. Like what is the optimal split between total decentralization of the economics versus the sort of incumbent style and capital structure of an existing type of infrastructure?
I think I can give an example of the project that I found. Their economic structure is very well designed, in my opinion at least, called Inference. They were releasing their own token incentives, but not for reward people. It's more used to allocate, for example, if you're running a data center for AI inferences, you can stake their token, and as much you stake, more job you will be routed to your service in order to get paid in USDC. So more you stake, more job you get, more revenue you will get as a contributor to the network. And I think this is a kind of an interesting approach towards incentivizing your contributors in order to make it more sustainable. And that is why you're rewarding those who are truly committed to your network and really interested to grow the pie.
I think this is an interesting question because one thing that may be a little underappreciated is that in these physical infrastructure networks, your node operators are traditional businesses or have traditional CapEx, OpEx structures. For example, if you are a storage provider on Filecoin, then you are functionally just operating like a data center. And the way that you get funding and the way that you can finance through debt or equity or whatever is identical to the way that traditional businesses work. There's just a little bit of a hitch, which is a lot of your compensation may be coming in the form of something that is fairly difficult to underwrite from a cash flow perspective or a revenue perspective. So I think that I'm not quite answering this question, but I'm answering the question I want to answer in a way, which is how one thing that we really need to think critically about when we design these protocols and kind of poof out this token that we use to be at least part of the reward structure for these operators is that these are individuals, or these are businesses that need to be able to operate as such, as like literal physical pieces of infrastructure that exists in the real world with like energy costs and like insurance that they have to pay for data, like so on and so forth. And so just giving out a token as a reward is not being, and also being blind to those constraints can sometimes hurt you.
So I think at this point, where we are from the growth of the technology, regulatory standpoint, my view right now is we're sort of at a point where I'm like, all bets are off. I think we're going to start to see things. I think we're going to start to see people try and shift new things. We take things like AI and X402 and being able to have agents execute payments in stable coins. That's still using crypto rails, but can look very much like a traditional model or not, depending on how you structure that. And there's some interesting components around being able to execute microtransactions in the case of like X402 in a way that is like absolutely not economically feasible to be able to run via credit cards or bank transfers. It just won't work that way in that type of system. So I think that's one thing that's interesting, is that we'll start to see, I think, a lot more blending and a lot more of how do you deploy what looks a little bit more like a traditional business model with crypto and crypto incentives. I think the other thing that's really interesting about this space is that it gives the ability to, and where I don't think, as much as we're starting to see things like revenue generation and some of the stats that are on DePIN Pulse and DePIN Ninja being things that just traditionally you would not look at if you think about a lot of DeFi projects and things like that. We are seeing some of those traditional things come together, but the fact that there's the decentralized component of it and the ability for consumer participation, ownership, allows the scale of these networks to be created at unprecedented rates that no centralized enterprise or government organization could be able to do. I think that was one of the takeaways. I was in DC earlier this year talking with a lot of Congress people, and they were really amazed to learn like DePIN is one of the great examples that I use to say, here's something that generally a government office or agency may try and do that would take you 5 to 10 years to do it, and a DePIN project can create that need infrastructure and data for the world in under a year. And it's really interesting seeing that happen, but it has to be that right balance of both of those two pieces.
Absolutely agree. Okay.
Oh, so I was gonna say, maybe one thing this made me think about is, I think the mental model but like a better mental model might be to think of these networks as an aggregation of traditional businesses, or like a distribution of traditional businesses rather than a traditional business. Like, these are networks and with heterogeneous providers with respect to how competitive they are. And so it's not like one business that provides X service at X cost. You have a network of providers that you've kind of bootstrapped, and they are all, and they each compete with each other on a number of different like factors depending on the network. So it's not one business, it's many, and you can maybe think of it as like a little island economy that specializes in producing some export in different ways.
Absolutely agree. How do you create valuable data network effects / positive network effects when participants may want to keep some of their most valuable data private?
Yeah, I think that's one of the really interesting things in this space is that the generation of data happens in real time, and I think there's a couple of pieces that come into play. One is the ability to leverage a lot of the privacy technologies that are out there to be able to allow that information to be used without losing that data. I think that's one of the reasons why we don't like, why as a user say, hey, I don't want to provide this data. It was a great use case or example. We have a partnership with Demo. We've had thousands of Demo users connect their vehicle data to Beacon Protocol. And one of the things that happened when we initially launched the ability to do that is people were going in and looking at the permissions, and there were some misunderstandings around even in how Demo was saying things were structured in the data. That they were like, well, wait, you're getting access to remotely unlock my vehicle? Like, that's really not okay. And it was, well, actually, the data is was the vehicle locked or unlocked at that point in time? So some of that is understanding the data, but also, there's a lot of interesting things. Can to use Demo as an example, which is, vehicle driving data, where they don't want that information to be given to an insurance company because they think it can be used against them. But at the same time, you also could choose to use that in a very positive way, where you could create new types of insurance plans that look nothing like what traditional insurance plans look like, because it could be priced per mile, and instead of like penalizing you, being able to get better and new incentive rates. So I think that's what's really interesting. And the network effects come from connecting data across a lot of different common points. I mean, location is a big one when we look at things like, some work on stuff around, joining data across projects like Demo, WeatherXM, Wingbits. There's a lot of really interesting opportunities there as you look at aggregation as well.
Yeah, piggybacking there, I would say like communication is the most important thing here. One of the data sets that we build is we work with Frontier AI Labs, and we try to ask them like, hey, what's the modality that's exciting to you guys over the next 6 to 12 months? And one of our customers here is really excited about computer use. Computer use here is ChatGPT is not just answering your questions, but it can click around your computer and go build slide decks and go build PowerPoints, like anything a McKinsey consultant can do, like ideally this ChatGPT agent or this Claude operator can do. And to that extent, like the challenge here is that there's not some big data set of humans using the computer, like videos, keyboard inputs, mouse clicks, and these agents as a consequence really suck at this. And so we built the largest computer use trajectory data set. And this is pretty invasive, like, to be honest. And we try to just be upfront with our contributors here of, hey, like, if you install this thing, it's not going to record you until you click the play button. It looks like a Loom recorder until you click the play button. When you click the play button, we can see your screen, and these are the things that we can see. And the only reason our contributors are doing this is because they're compensated for that privacy invasion in some way. And that compensation rate needs to be commensurate with the value of the data here. And so we pay end contributors here $30 an hour, which is like 60 grand, which is like a lot of money in a lot of the world annualized. And so to the extent that like, I think for us at least, our messaging path here is like, be really upfront with the users. And if it is something that, is privacy invasive in some way, like you need to compensate them for that edge.
Go ahead.
I don't want to answer.
Okay. Building on that, in terms of DePIN networks, I think there's, even within a specific DePIN network, there's some variance in terms of reliability and performance that you're seeing, even just between certain operators, and then definitely across multiple different projects within a given vertical. How do you price in and determine a framework for pricing in decentralized networks where these metrics may vary?
Do you mean variance within, like, let's say 2 compute networks that compete with one another, or operators within a network that are providing the service on that network?
I think both, but let's, I guess we'll silo in on one specific network, 2 specific operators within a given network.
I think that's the beauty of these networks, is that you create these markets. I think that like the whole, I think competition that is transparent and pushes operators to become better, and then also gives consumers and also allows consumers to express kind of like their own personal little Sharpe ratio risk reward trade-off of like, oh, this operator might not be as great, but they're cheaper, or oh, this one is kind of at a premium, is a feature and not a bug of these like infrastructure networks.
Do you think reputation and historical performance play into that at all?
Definitely. I think being able to, I think all of these things help you underwrite the risk of your decision to work with certain providers. So, but the great thing about a lot of these networks is that depending on the network, for example, like Filecoin is an example of one in which there are cryptographic proofs of storage. And so that might be one in which reputation may play less of a factor if the structure of the network is engineered in such a way that you can real-time or like daily verify the presence of your data via these cryptographic proofs. If that's not the case in another network, then maybe that changes how you think about provider selection.
Can I say it's a bit off topic, but regarding the reputation, I would like to see that kind of data in the future to be interoperable within the chain with different DeFi applications. So it will not be useful only for DePIN projects to validate if the contributor is good or not, but also a contributor to take a loan based on his proofs of contribution of the past 30 days, let's say, for example. And it would be interesting, and I already saw that I think ISR and Credify trying to do something similar, and Loopscale with a Helium was thinking about it in past, but not sure that you're proceeding with that one.
Looking at this sector through, I think, a little bit more of a macro lens here, what industries or use cases do you think are going to see the fastest mass adoption in DePIN, and why?
I think decentralized wireless connection, Helium, XNet, Viro, Dab already showing that the pace of it is very fast, the pace of development is very fast, and it's needed, especially, for example, me myself, I'm from Kazakhstan. We're a big country, but with small population, and most of the population located in a couple of cities. And everybody trying to migrate to the bigger cities, and the current infrastructure is not able to sustain wireless network. And that is why I can see, for example, 10 years in my capital, 10 years back, living in my capital, internet connection was good, but if to compare it right now, it's much more worse. And when I moved here to Boston, I saw that some of the companies are offloading their cellular data through Helium, for example, or through Wi-Fi hotspots, which is quite amazing, in my opinion.
I'll say, instead of a specific sort of subsector or niche, I think anything that we are able to abstract the complications of crypto and blockchain out of it and make it just feel like you're using a thing and not having to jump through the hoops. I think that's a really key thing that anyone can be able to. I think that's where we're starting to see some of those things where, in DePIN, it's okay, great. Hey, I've set up smart home sensors before, right? So, yep, cool. Going and getting a sensor for a DePIN project and installing it and setting it up ends up feeling like something I've done before. I think as we look at things like, decentralized compute, I think decentralized AI is going to start to bridge over into DePIN as well. There's already a lot of things around distributed compute, distributed data, all those different pieces of it. Anything that can be done in a way that just feels natural and isn't, oh yeah, hey, I got to go sign into my MetaMask to make this happen. I think that's really what's going to drive a lot of mainstream adoption, because it's fun to be a part of these new and growing things, but you shouldn't need to learn the capabilities of crypto to be a part of it.
Yeah, I would double down on AI here, which is, I think there's kind of three main verticals within decentralized AI. There's data, which is what we do. We're able to bootstrap these data sets at a cheaper human labor cost than centralized providers. That's like a real value prop to our and customers here. There's the infrastructure stack, so like GPUs. Right now, the cheapest place to get an H100 is actually Akash. You can rent one for about $1.25 an hour. It's like pretty incredible and like a great user experience. And then training, like we're really excited about the advancements that like Nous and Prime Intellect have done. You can bootstrap these like really interesting esoteric models, huge amounts of compute provided, build across very specific modalities, and end up with a model that's like much better on a post-train than the pre-existing base model. Like these are all verticals where there's like real enterprise demand, where there's real urgency to pay, and where there's like real value being derived from the customer. We're really excited about those.
And my last question for the group, if each of you could solve one fundamental problem holding back DePIN as a whole today, what would it be?
I think Phil had said it perfectly, which was abstract away crypto or blockchain from the end user experience. We don't want familiarity with how. Okay, no 0x's in front of anything when you have to work on like something like that, right? It's like people just using something, sign in with your email, and whatever, just all the normal things people do in their daily lives. Crypto can happen under the hood. People don't need to know that it's happening.
Yeah, I'll sort of extend a little bit on that. I think if there is a way to solve, and this is starting to happen right now, if we could solve enterprises getting on board with DePIN, they're already it's interesting because it's really not that big of a stretch from some of the other services that they're already using. It's not that big of a stretch from having distributed networks on AWS where, okay, great, we already understand that, we've got our data centers spread all across the world. There's not that big of a bridge to jump there. And I think if there was a way to solve it and to see what that could do for their organizations, I think that would be a great way to really drive a lot more mainstream adoption, because it is sort of like a next iteration of cloud. And I'm a big believer in, look, we already saw, everything was being built for cloud the last, 10 or 20 years, right? We need to be building for blockchain and decentralization going forward. And I think that'll really help.
We need more salespeople. I would say as an industry, like we are really good at building cool shit. We are unfortunately not very good at messaging the cool shit that we've built to traditional enterprises or traditional buyers. And I would say that the biggest thing holding us back right now is we have a ton of supply. We have so many cool markets. We have so many cool data sets and infrastructure primitives. Like we need people to go take Web 2 Fortune 500 companies to ball games, wine and dine them, buy them nice cocktails, and get them to sign deals.
Definitely agree.
I would agree with the communication. Communication is basically the things that will help to elaborate enterprises in order why it's very profitable and beneficial for them to join the DePIN networks, because it's additional value and an additional source of distribution of their services.
Awesome. Let's give it up for our panelists today. I think we have time for one question, if anyone has one. All set. Cool. Awesome. Thanks so much, guys. Really appreciate it.